I'm going to go back a number of years to what eventually prompted us to purchase our current boat. Now, pictures and videos were pretty rare in those days, so I'll be adding audio-visual references as they are available or as they seem appropriate. My interest in water basically all started in 1956 when I built my first sailboat. That boat was heavy and poorly designed. It probably would have killed me, except that it was too heavy to launch. In the end, I added wheels to the hull and let the wind and the sails simply blow me down the road. Luckily, there was little traffic in those days. A couple of years later, a friend of the family built a small speedboat using plywood and glue. After riding this boat, I was hooked. I remember being a bit worried about water dissolving the glue and the hull falling apart, but we were only a mile or so from shore, and I was a pretty good swimmer, so I took a chance. The boat handled incredibly well and was a testament to the engineer that built her. In 1961, I built an 8-foot plywood pram with my father. Now, this was a popular design at the time and was built from a kit that included the plans and all of the materials for less than $50. It rode okay, but when I tried to mount a sail, I realized that it was never going to sail well, except downwind. The following year, I built a narrower and much faster boat. It was one built from plywood scrap as well. Unfortunately, this hull lacked sufficient lateral stability and also did not sail upwind very well. I scrapped that hull and used the materials for other projects. Interestingly, not many years after this second plywood build, my wife and I purchased a 15-foot Grumman double-ended canoe, which actually did sail pretty well. We still have that canoe to this day and use it primarily for just paddling around some of the smaller ponds and doing a little lake fishing. And as a side note, after building a lot of plywood boats when I was younger, I really appreciate the design and construction efforts that go into the boat building contest during the Anacortes Waterfront Festival every summer. It's a lot of fun to watch. No big cannon, huh?
That little boat, it was so narrow.
Yeah, we're fine. Keep going. Do not light one of these jobs on fire. Left. We gotta get ahead of this guy. Yeah.
I get it to the closest dock and try and climb out.
Pretty much, about this point.
They're talking about going to the dock.
Good for
Oh my
them.
gosh, there it goes.
They sunk.
And they're fully clothed.
I wonder if they know there's a good test of the ladder at the head of the slip.
There's a ladder there?
Yeah, each slip has a ladder.
Oh, they do?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, at the very end, I see.
Getting back to our story, in the fall of 1967, I was riding my motorcycle. Not this particular one, but it looks so good I had to include a photo of it. And I came to a red light. And this beautiful girl walks across the road in front of me and decided to take her sailing. As soon as the weather warmed up the following spring, I took her out sailing on a 14-foot laser on Lake Washington. Now, we had a really good wind that day. It was a relaxing sail. However, to this day, I remember looking at her hands as she gripped the gunnels with white knuckles, and I realized that she was terrified on the water. We really had our work cut out for us. Over the next couple of years, I swam with her and even got her to don scuba gear at one point and go underwater for a few minutes. She eventually became more comfortable on the water, although she still gives it quite a bit of respect. In the summer of 1969, I took my first sail through the U.S. and Canadian Gulf Islands. This was a real game changer. I skippered a 20-foot Blanchard Junior knockabout for a 10-day sail through the islands in perfect weather. Once you've experienced the beauty of these islands, it's hard to forget them. The next summer, 1970, my wife and I sailed an old converted Bristol Bay 30-foot ketch through the islands. Now, this old boat had a concrete keel, an air-cooled Lister 2-cylinder diesel engine, and prior to leaving on this trip, I'd spent 2 weeks at the boatyard in the heat, caulking the planked hull and getting it ready for the islands. But this sail ultimately gave us something to look forward to in the future. This was our first introduction as a couple to sailing in the islands, and we really enjoyed it. In the following years, we were lucky enough to occasionally be able to get out sailing, but as our growing family and our jobs took more and more of our time, we put the thought of having our own boat on a back burner. We hadn't completely forgotten the dream, but it couldn't compete with raising our 3 boys. And it's important to note here that while our family was growing, we still had an opportunity to explore some of the beauty that the islands had to offer. So getting back to our video, my wife and I, or maybe it was mostly me, had talked about someday owning a sailboat, and this went on for many years. We looked at a lot of different sailboats. I remember looking at CNCs, we looked at some Benettos, we looked at Catalinas, we actually looked at some Hunters, and we looked at a couple of Pearsons too, which we really liked. But we never really felt like we had the time or even the money to really own one. And while we were able to sail with friends and family occasionally, owning our own boat was always something we put off to some future date. And then all of a sudden one day we realized that our kids were growing up, and if we ever wanted to share the joy of sailing with them, it had better be now. Before we could buy our boat, we needed to assess our requirements and prioritize them. Basically, we needed to know how we were going to use the boat. This was the single most important question. We knew we wanted to be on the water and trouble-free, well, as much as a boat can be trouble-free, as soon as possible. That pretty much meant a newer boat that didn't need upgrades or fixes. We decided to buy a new boat, as we didn't want to spend time working on the boat instead of actually getting out on the water with the family. I'd spent many years working on older boats. I knew that that would not meet our requirements. And to this day, I think buying a new boat was one of the better decisions we made, especially considering that the purchase price was not much more than a similar used boat. When we looked at how we would use the boat, we knew that the kids and their friends would be going with us fairly often, so we needed sleeping accommodations and adequate tankage for at least 5 people for a week. When more people were on board, we tended to go for shorter trips, so the tankage was not an issue in those instances. This ruled out some of the smaller boats and took us into the mid-30-foot range. Because this was our minimum size, we also wanted to look at larger boats into the 40-foot range. However, after looking at how often those larger boats actually left their slips, their appeal soon wore off. Even now, 30 years later, we still think we made a good choice for our needs. My wife and I still spend a couple of weeks on board with no capacity issues, although we do now use a second fridge to ensure that we always have cold beer on hot summer days. So how much would we spend on a boat? How much could we spend on a boat? This was the one piece of the puzzle that I was most uncertain about. Strangely, it wasn't the purchase price so much as the continuing maintenance costs that concerned me. I looked at the history of various makes and models and tried to find some brands that were both popular and had owners groups that liked their boats. I also crawled around inside these boats following lines and hoses. I looked at potential boats with systems access in mind. I remember crawling around under cabinets and assessing access to plumbing lines, electrical wiring. Some of the builders allowed easy access for future upgrades and part replacement, while other builders did not. In the almost 30 years of ownership of our boat, I have come to appreciate the access, but have also discovered a few areas where required access might have been anticipated and provided. We improved upon that access when needed. For example, when we needed to replace our fuel sending unit, we added a new Bexon port so that we could avoid having to remove the entire fuel tank. In the end, I determined that there's simply no way to know what the future holds, and that you have to take a leap of faith. We ruled out Pearsons, CNCs, Benettos, and Hunters. At the time, and here we're talking about 1996, the new Catalina sailboats that we looked at had good build quality with a strong keel grid, no more of that Catalina smile, accessible plumbing and electrical systems, a better warranty, and lower purchase price than most other boats. Many of the sailboats in the mid-30 range had similar layouts, but the C-34 Mark II stood out for the design of its sugar scoop transom. I did some diving when I was younger, so I appreciated the seats that were molded into each side of the sugar scoop. I also liked the way the cockpit lockers allowed longer items to be stored without impacting the space below deck. The layout of the cockpit also put the primary winches easily at hand while keeping the lines out of the way of other people sitting in the cockpit. Frank Butler, who's the founder of Catalina Yachts, and Jerry Douglas, who's the chief designer of Catalina Yachts, or they were then, personally talked with us about the boat and any concerns we had. They offered to stand behind their products for many years following us taking delivery, as this was the very first of a new series of Mark II hulls. Additionally to a significantly better price, Catalina also provided an epoxy bottom. Dealer included 6 months of free moorage as well as personalized sailing instruction. And I had some experience sailing in coastal waters, but learning from someone with years of offshore experience was a bonus. And the fact that it was a female sailing instructor worked out for me. My wife, remember the white knuckles, had no problem following her instructions. One reason we chose the Catalina 34 was for its inherent safety. It has good stability and can be sailed single-handed. I wanted a simple single-line reefing system so the mainsail could be reefed from the cockpit. About the time you decide to reef, it's usually already getting pretty rough. A furling headsail also adds to the safety of a boat. I spent years using Hank-on headsails and didn't want to leave the helm to make headsail changes. Having all lines run aft to the cockpit also provided a bit of extra safety. We don't race, but we like good sailing performance. The 150 Genoa and a 4-foot taller rig makes us a pretty fast boat, even in light air. We wanted a fast hull and a rig that could power us in light winds, which are common in the Pacific Northwest. The 52-foot tall rig on our boat allows us to clear bridges that larger boats often cannot pass under. At the same time, our sail area, especially with our 150 Genoa, usually makes us the fastest boat on the water. Also, the fin keel and newly designed spade rudder provide exceptional upwind handling. Like most consumer items, boats undergo continuous improvement, perhaps with a few backward steps from time to time. Also, remember this review is not meant to imply that any other sailboats, including those we might not choose, might not perfectly meet someone else's needs.